I said to Dr. McAllister, like my first day, he's doing all of his tests, like, but tell me how you feel. I said, I don't know. I don't know how I feel. I can take a deep breath in. I'm getting the oxygen out of the air. I can exhale. I just don't feel right. I don't feel right. I don't, and you can't necessarily put your finger on it. You know what I mean?
Hey everyone, Travis here. Welcome back to Concussion. Today we're talking with Lonnie Quinn. He's a CBS meteorologist in New York. Earlier this year, Lonnie was in a car accident and suffered a traumatic brain injury. The similarities in our stories hit me hard. I mean, my story coming out of his mouth. He looked fine on the outside, so he went back to work within a few days of the accident. But inside, an unpredictable storm was looming on the horizon. Lonnie opens up about the invisible struggles that come with concussion recovery, like light sensitivity, emotional swings, driving anxiety, and that overwhelming desire to just feel normal again. Like I said, it was surreal hearing my story coming through someone else's mouth. We also talk about the science behind concussion symptoms, the challenges of navigating recovery in the public eye, and how hard it is when people closest to you don't quite understand what you're going through. If you're a medical professional trying to better your patients, or you're walking the path of recovery, this episode has something for you. Let's get into it.
Okay.
Yeah, so thank you so much for reaching out and willing to share your story. We really appreciate it.
Well, I think it's a story or something that needs to be talked about. So
We couldn't agree more, actually. That's kind of been our purpose behind this podcast. And to give you a brief idea as to our story and kind of what led to this, I'm Abby. I'm a physical therapist. I treat concussions on a clinical side. And Travis, as you know, sustained a concussion 9 years ago. And back then, even just 9 years ago, things were so different in terms of how concussions were talked about, how they were treated, how they were managed. And he and I reconnected later on and started this just to be able to unfold the things that we wish we knew back then. And it meant so much when we heard that you were willing to talk about what happened to you in such a public way, because it's something that we are just really trying to put familiarity behind and make these things accessible to others.
Yeah, because there's a stigma associated with it. There's lots of things to talk about. One, there's a stigma, like anytime there's like a deficiency in your brain, it's like, okay, well, that's one thing. The other thing is, you guys were talking about how things have changed so much. I remember when I was like a much younger man playing like in some softball leagues and things. I remember one guy who was just sort of warming up on the sidelines. We were throwing the ball back and forth, and the third baseman in the game that was underway threw an errant throw to first base, and it hit him in the head, and it knocked him out. But he ended up like regaining consciousness. And it was more like, whoa, man, that one, rung my bell. And then it was almost like this badge of honor that he went out and played. All right, he went out to play. He'd been knocked out. And he went out to play. And I remember him telling us, like, guys, put me in right field. I don't need a lot of action today, that type of thing. But it's like, man, talk about the wrong things to be doing. And for me, I was in a car accident on New Year's Eve. And I wake up in the hospital, and then once they finish all their testing, and really what they were testing for, remember, an emergency room is like a triage facility, and they were checking to see if my brain was bleeding. And once they found that it wasn't bleeding, they discharged me, and I was sent home. I was sent home with the instructions to take Tylenol. And that was it. So I went home. Not only do I go home, wobbly walking, sort of bouncing off the walls, and kind of like foggy in my head, but I went home. I never felt nauseous or anything like that, but I went home, and then I went to work the next day. And I went to work with my regular schedule, right? And about a month and a half into it, so it's a month and a half of like grinding it out, but not feeling right, but just grinding it out. I'm walking out onto the set for the 11 o'clock news, and all of a sudden I lose the vision in my left eye. And everyone's freaking out, but of course they're thinking, oh, is this like a precursor to a stroke or something? And they send me back to the hospital. But this time they're sort of on top of it, and they say, okay, look, this is not stroke related. You need to see a neurologist. So I saw a neurologist, and he was a little bent out of shape that this was never diagnosed as a concussion. And he
Yeah.
he and my bosses sort of got together, and they immediately put me onto a half-day work schedule. At the same
Nice.
time, he had ordered an MRI. And once my MRI came back, that's when he called me up and said, "Whoa, we gotta talk." So now we all get into another one of these like conference call things with my bosses, and my bosses here at CBS have been great. But we're all on the call, and he's sort of in elementary school language for us to understand what he's talking about. He said, "Look, your brain has a bunch of neurons with synapses, these little tails that come off of it, and it's down the synapses that these electrical impulses will travel, causing you to whatever, raise your hand, scratch your head, whatever, fine." And he said, if you've got like just a couple of those, it's a minor concussion. If you have 10, it's a major concussion. He said, Lonnie, you've got 21 of them, and we need to
Wow.
bump you
Wow.
to a traumatic brain injury. Now, granted, it's the low end of a traumatic brain injury, but it's a traumatic brain injury.
Right.
Yeah.
And
Still your brain that's injured.
exactly. And so with that, they then, my bosses and Dr. McAllister came up with this plan of, hey, this has got to be 6 to 8 weeks. We need total rest and relaxation combined with some therapy. No bright lights, no TV, no screen time, all that type of thing. Of course, I couldn't have handled the bright lights anyway. And
Yeah, that's
and he said,
one thing I wanted to ask you about the bright lights with your line of work.
yep.
I would imagine because that was hard for me as well, and that's one thing I certainly wanted to ask. How did you handle the lights and noise?
You're right. So remember, I go back to work just like 2, 3 days after the accident, and it was tough. It was really
Yeah.
hard. And a TV studio is filled with cameras and microphones and bright lights. All right, bright lights were everywhere, and all they did was exacerbate the problem. Made the headache worse. I mean, searingly
Mhm.
bad. But then I ended up alternating. You ready for this? Because when I left the hospital, they said, look, take Tylenol every 4 hours. If it ever gets really bad, you can alternate. They told me between Tylenol and Motrin every 2 hours. So I'd come to work. I'm taking Tylenol and Motrin every 2 hours my entire workday. My entire workday. I
Oh
did that
man.
for a month and a half. And when all this finally came to light with a neurologist who sort of knew what was happening, he was like, the everything you've done is the wrong thing. And the problem is, I didn't know any better, and
Yeah,
and I
Exactly.
do
doing
know
the best you
now.
could with what you know.
And here I am with
Yeah.
you guys, and this will be my new platform. People in the media, we tend to all jump on board some cause, and now that this one has hit so close to home, this
Yeah.
this is me getting the word out, and I'll happily join you guys whenever.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate that. You do have a big voice, and for somebody to go through what you go through, and you were talking like identical things to what so many people go through, and it sounds like you have a great work family and a lot of care there, which I actually had that too. I worked for Jacobs Engineering when I had my accident, and just having that family like work
Support system
environment.
there.
Yeah, that support system is great. I know there's a lot of people who aren't quite that fortunate, and it is so much of a struggle, and I'm so glad that you're helping us get this message out there.
Well, and Abby, I also want to talk to you as like a therapist, because one of the things that I did when I went back to work, get this, again, about the worst thing I could do, I drove an hour to work each way. I mean, it was like Mr. Toad's
Driving.
Wild Ride. Yeah, I mean, if you can imagine, it just everything is wobbly in my world to begin with, and now I'm
Hmm.
driving. I will say,
Driving is
I will
that's
tell
one
you,
of
I will tell
Travis's
this.
major
Oh,
complaints still.
and you know what? It's better. It's better right now. Although I'm not driving anymore. CBS
Okay.
again, to applaud them. They now send a car service for me back and forth.
Oh,
Oh,
Um,
that's
that's
amazing.
yeah, that's
yeah,
awesome.
no, those folks are they're
I
bosses slash friends slash, I mean, they're borderline saints. They've been so great. And
That's great.
That is a big difference in your recovery, is having people around you acknowledge there's help to be had.
Yeah.
And I have two questions for you. The first thing that comes to mind is, you don't have anything to quantify after you were sent home. You're kind of given the take Tylenol, things will get better. If you hadn't had that episode where you lost vision in your left eye, do you think you'd still be muscling through?
Absolutely. I know I would still be muscling through, and I would do it until something collapsed. And I mean, I'm telling you, I just, thank God, so often when I think about it, I'm telling you, Abby, my drives were, I mean, I can't even believe I'm admitting this, but like weaving out in lanes and stuff like that. I got through it. And Dr. McAllister, my neurologist, has told me when I came back to work, because I'm on half days coming back to work. He's told me I passed all my assessment tests to be able to go back to work, and I showed up. But he told me, he said, I don't want to have you discharged from any of your therapists, because so often when we find people being put back into sort of a hectic, sort of strenuous atmosphere, they can take steps backwards, and you don't want to have these cases closed, so that it's just that much tougher to get back in with your therapists and things. And I've also been treated at Gaylord Rehabilitation Hospital up in Wallingford, Connecticut, which is, at least from what I've seen and my experiences, it's kind of like a mecca for head injuries up there. They really know what they're doing, and there are some poor folks who are far worse off than I was, but they work miracles with everybody. And I'm living proof of it. I'm here talking to you guys on this podcast, and I just finished CBS National News, the evening news.
Awesome.
So I like
we saw your video of coming back to work, and it's just remarkable to have that kind of support around you. But despite so much understanding that you experienced within your work family, did you find yourself having to educate people in your circle outside of work as to what a concussion means?
Without a doubt. Even the people who were incredibly supportive at work, I still had to do that. As a matter of fact, and I remember when I showed up for my very first day at Gaylord Hospital, and I'm filling out this assessment sheet, and one of the questions was, do people ever mistake you for being drunk? And yeah, I was getting that all the time, because I do have a very wobbly gait when I walk, and I would sort of bounce and ping pong off the walls. And yeah, I don't think people mean anything malicious by it, but they're like, whoa, Lonnie, you get a couple of drinks this afternoon? I'm like, no, this is my existence right now. Yeah. And as a matter of fact, in terms of that, I think I told you that I passed all my assessment tests, and I'm cleared to come back to work. But Dr. McAllister told me, in terms of truly getting a grip on everything, he thinks October.
Okay.
Okay.
And then the accident was in January, so by October, but you've only really had a chance to recover from this just recently.
Since like March, I kind of began that. I went in, the end of March. I went in the end of March.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned the lights, and Travis, like I said, the driving and the lights are the two things that are just, he's 9 years out, and we're just now kind of addressing those things.
No.
Not to kind of spoiler alert the premise of this podcast, but when he and I first met after his accident, he was being sent for ankle pain. But of course, there was a much bigger issue at hand. He had a traumatic brain injury, but nobody in the medical field really knew the path forward for him, because the bleeding had stopped. All of his other injuries have healed. Yeah. And they were kind of just picking up these ancillary things. But now that we've crossed paths again, I'm much more into the concussion realm. We're doing things to address the difficulty he's having with driving. But the other things that you mentioned at your job that I think are worth highlighting is, not only are you dealing with bright lights, you're dealing with lots of concentration, multitasking, memorization, and physical coordination. I mean, the amount of things that go on for you to put on your broadcast, it's not something that can be done in a single mode. You have to be jack of all trades to coordinate everything that's going on. What did you notice when you were in that phase before getting any treatment that was really tough for you?
Okay, it was brutal. And I don't even like to bring up tapes from that time, because I have done this, guys, for 27 years I've been doing this, and I've been here at CBS News for 18 years, and I love my job, and it comes the presentation side of it comes very naturally to me. Well, you take that away from what I do, it was a thought process the entire time. I had to think about things that normally just came very easily to me, that were almost like instinctive,
Yes.
and now I'm thinking about them, and then I forget. And do you want to be on live TV, be it just in New York City or be it in the nation, and then forget what your next thought is? It makes the situation worse. It doesn't like, okay, look, I got to just move on. It compounds, and then all of a sudden
Yeah.
now you feel your face getting flush. You feel your heartbeat picking up. All of this just makes it harder. And I will tell you, and again, I'm a real open book when it comes to this type of thing, because I don't think we can really get the word out unless you are painfully honest. And Dr. McAllister
Right.
told me that was going to be hard, because remember, I'm doing the weathercast before I've seen any doctors at all, right? For a traumatic brain injury, I'm just gutting it out, not coming out with really sharp looking, clean, weathercasts. They just look. I don't look like myself. Anyway, Dr. McAllister knew that was going to be an issue, even coming back this time after all my 7 weeks of therapy. And again, like I said, they worked miracles with me. He prescribed small dose of Adderall,
Oh, yeah.
and it
Yeah.
helps my concentration immensely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been taking Adderall, the same. They prescribed me a dose, and that helps me. Just like you said, it helps me focus, and it helps me get through the day,
Yeah.
and it helps me keep my stamina throughout the day. Because I know at first I was very tired. I would be tired all the time.
Me too. Me too. At this point,
Yeah.
still on that. And that, as a matter of
Yes.
fact, they were going to put me back to the 11 o'clock news, because right now I'm doing half days. My first week back was half days, and then this week was supposed to. I thought I'd go back to full days. I don't have the stamina.
It's hard.
I'm
It's hard.
just exhausted, and not only am I exhausted, I find myself asleep. Like at 11 o'clock at night. So when I was talking to my boss, who I can't herald her enough. I mean, she's just great, but I told her, I said, I need a week to try to get on this new sleep schedule, because my hours on a regular day, 3 p.m. to midnight. All right, that's not where I've been for the last 2 months or so, and
Yeah.
so I'm trying to get myself there. But I've always been the Energizer Bunny, and I just don't have that energy right now.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard. It does. It does. It takes a lot of energy out of you. And one other thing that happened to me, and let me see if you might be able to relate to this.
Yeah.
I started to become like more, say, overly emotional about things. Like if something I seen sad on TV, like I would get
Forget it.
very sad.
This
You
is
know, if
yeah.
if I would get like sad or I would get depressed about something, like it wouldn't just stop. It would like go to the point where it was like very hard. Like it was, and that lasted for a long time.
Yeah, I'm 1,000% on board with that. All right. My wife and we've been married for 18 years, and I so proudly always tell everybody we've never had a knockdown drag out fight. We never have. I mean, we have our arguments, we just disagreements, but we've never had a knockdown drag out. Oh my gosh. When I was on that period before I ended up going to see a neurologist, and I was just going to work about my regular day, guys, I went up one day into my daughter's bedroom, and she asked me to help Lily with her homework. So I go up to help Lily with her homework, and we're doing it. Then she calls us down for dinner, so Lily goes down for dinner. I stay up there because we went up to do homework, but you can't work on her desk. Guys, her desk is 8 feet long. It's 8 feet long, and there's no space to work on it. So we're sitting on her bed doing it, and I just want this to be sort of more dedicated for work. So she's down having dinner. I then just start rearranging the desk to give her look, I can't get rid of everything, but I got rid of it so I have maybe a good 3-foot swath of clear desk. We can work there, and this can be dedicated for homework. Okay, fine. my wife comes up to get me, said, "Hey, aren't you coming for dinner?" And she sees what I'm doing. She said, "You know, honey, Lily is 12 years old. You should really ask her before you start moving her things." And I said, "Well, a lot of this is just Legos I'm moving. I think we're fine." She goes, "No, still, she's a 13-year-old and she is developing her own opinions. 12-year-old, and she's developing her own opinions on things." You would have thought that she had called me a baby killer. I
Yeah.
went off the hook. I mean, it was,
Hmm.
and she was like, "Who is this?" That's happened a few times. Um, Dr. McAllister has gotten involved because he said he sees this all the time with his patients. And he said, honestly, he said, most of the time I end up having a session with my patient and the spouse because they've got to know that this is so when it happens now, because I don't want it to happen. I don't view this as a ticket to explode. I don't want it in my life. But whenever it does, my wife, and there is a bona fide saint, my wife will say, "You know what, this is your TBI talking, not you." And then I've had other times when I was at Gaylord. This is a all right. This one is really elevated around what you're talking about, Travis. They're doing the assessment tests. So I go into this room and it's got a huge touch screen. It's about 4.5 feet wide, and it's just white, right? But what happens is black dots pop on the screen, and they stay on the screen for 1.5 seconds. All I have to do is touch those black dots as they appear, sort of testing my peripheral vision as well, stuff like that. I do it. I score a 98 with a 98% accuracy. Okay. And she said, "Great, there's no deficiency there. Let's try the same exercise, but this time we're going to have a static letter A right in the middle of the screen. And as long as that A just stays nice and still, it's not moving, it's not flashing, you just keep pushing those dots as they come out. The minute it starts flashing, you have to touch that flashing letter before you can touch any of the other dots." And I'm like, okay. Now, after finishing the first exercise, I'm thinking like, oh, these things are so mindless. What am I doing here? They do the second one. I scored a 98 on the first one with a 98% accuracy. I scored a 44 on the second one with a 38% accuracy. And the therapist was like, she's a vestibular, or maybe she's occupational, whatever it was. She just said, okay, well, I found something that we need to work on. Now, that number flashes on the screen, so I just know what I scored. I don't know. You would have thought that all my family
It's
had been killed
devastating.
because I just
Yeah.
collapsed in
Hmm.
tears. I mean,
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
tears, and and yeah, it's embarrassing and whatnot. She's like, do you need some tissues? And I said, I don't know what I need, but and she goes,
Yeah.
no, look, and then they of course know they've been down this route, and she told me, she said, Lonnie, I see this every day, 10 times a day with every patient that comes through that door. This is what we work on. This is what we fix. And I'm happy to tell you and your people who are reviewing that when I passed my assessment test on that, I got a 97. So,
Nice.
Good for you.
Yeah.
woo,
Nice.
yeah.
Awesome job.
Yeah,
Yet
her and I are now working on a lot of different tests like that, and we're doing drop sticks, and she's having me do a lot of therapy extremely similar to that.
Yeah.
yeah, it's the brain can heal, but when you see the brain injury for the first time, so up until you had something objective to say this is an area that needs some improvement, it all seems kind of ambiguous.
Oh, what
You have the
100%,
symptoms, you
100%.
know something's wrong, you don't feel like yourself, but then you have this piece of evidence in front of you, and that is truly devastating to feel like there's something wrong with my brain.
Yep.
This is what
Yeah.
makes me think, move, act. This is who I am.
Yeah.
The understanding that there's something that could be better about it is really not an easy pill to swallow.
No
And
kidding.
especially in the mix of not being able to, I try kind of explain it to Travis is now your emotions are just raw. Things that you would normally feel, that you have coping mechanisms that keep you from going down the rabbit hole of the sadness, the anger, the rage, all of that. Now that coping mechanism takes a little bit longer to kick in when you first have a brain injury of any sort, concussion of any sort. But that makes it so much harder to find your way into, how do I advocate for myself? How do I find what's best for me and find this path forward of starting to heal?
Yeah. You know what? I don't. I certainly don't know those answers. I'm sort of finding things day by day. I will
Yeah.
say, great support system, be it medical, be it my family, be it folks at work. So I feel sort of the warm and fuzzy in terms of that regard. But a lot of this stuff is, well, clearly it's new to me. I don't know anything about this stuff. And,
Yeah.
and Dr. McAllister feels very confident that by October, he said, you should know by October you're going to be as good as new. Now, I don't know if he means you're going to be perfect. I don't know what he means by that. I do know he told me that these synapses that snap or sort of break from the neurons, he said, and they show up as a white little flash on the MRI. And he said, look, they can heal themselves. That synapse and that neuron can like reattach. I hope I'm using the right wording here because this is not
You're doing great
Yeah.
explaining it. Yeah.
Yep.
And he said they can heal. That can heal itself back together. He said, or not. I said, okay, what's the or not? Once we find these areas of deficiency, does that mean they're never going to come back? He goes, no. Then your brain figures out a detour around that white flash. And
Exactly.
I honestly,
Yeah.
though,
And
if I have to pick, though, if I got to pick, guys, I want it to heal. I want the synapse and the
yeah,
neuron to
Yeah.
go right back. I don't want to know about detours and things in my brain. And again, it just all goes back to what you're touching upon right now, Abby, which is it just feels like I don't want to know about something different about my brain than it was before this accident.
mhm.
Let me ask you this, Lonnie. Has anyone said to you yet, you'll just have to it's a new normal that you'll just have to get used to?
Should they be saying that to me? I haven't had that, and maybe they know me well enough to know that would tip me over an edge right now.
Yeah. So they said that to me quite a bit. They're like, it's a new normal. You just have to get used
You
to
don't
this
want to
new
know about
normal.
that, Travis.
I said, look, I that was one of, just like you, man. Like it pushed me over an edge. Like I did not want to hear that. I did not want to be in a new normal. I wanted exactly like you to have everything back to the way it was before, and that is like, it's a fight to get back to that place, and it's taken me a long time to get there. And just recently, when especially with the emotionality of things, I was talking to Abby when we decided to start this podcast, and I was telling her about how I still get like extremely emotional, and she was telling me about how when certain parts of your brain are damaged, the emotional regulation goes away, and there's things that you can do. And I remember the first thing I said to her was, "Can you fix that?" Because that was the biggest thing for me to get these emotions under control
you know what?
after a long time.
I'd love to hear, what I know this is your podcast, but I'd love to hear what are some of those things that can be done to get the emotions under control.
So we work a lot on impulse control.
I have none. I have none, Ab. I have none.
Same.
So yeah, so there are things to do, and it sounds like you're on the right path. The fact that they were able to test something, the test you mentioned where there was an A on the screen and then you had peripheral vision cues that you had to respond to. The fact that you improved that from a 38 to somewhere in the 90s, you have firsthand witnessed how amazing the brain is.
Yep.
It can heal. And that message of optimism is so important because we have a balance here where we need to acknowledge that there are symptoms of a concussion that oftentimes get dismissed because no one else can see them, no one else can feel them, they don't have anything to identify with. But also in that same way, we also have an opportunity to identify what those things are to fix them. And Travis had to go 9 years kind of muscling through this on his own. How you explained you went back to work and tried to just put on the brave face because there should be some muscle memory. And then now that he's at the point of realizing I want this better and we're working together to find ways to fix it, driving is his biggest thing. And then the second thing is that emotional regulation. So a lot of what we're doing focuses on those skills specifically. he's noticing improvement 9 years out.
Yeah.
So,
So it's improving with the things that we're doing.
So I think it's important for you to know too, the things that you're experiencing right now, also there's opportunity for improvement.
Well, okay. That is good to hear. Yeah, overall, like my experience has been such that day one of showing up at the rehab hospital and doing, wow, what I thought were some real mindless things. Like, oh, come on, guys. I mean, I don't want to be wasting your time. I shouldn't be here. That type of thing. Because I look fine on the outside. I'm good to go. And I've got this one pegboard, right? That's got all these. Well, they've got three different shapes of pegboards. They've got three different shapes of pegs to go in the board. They've got a circle, they have a star, and they have a triangle. All right, those are, and I got to put them in the slots where they go. And I didn't really find any problem with that. And like, okay, I got through that.
Mm-hmm.
And then she has me stand up, and she puts this little dot on the wall that it's at eye level, and she's like, okay, all I want you to do is just nod your head up and down, but I want you to keep that dot in focus. So I'm like, nodding my head up and down, and there's no way that I can focus on this dot. There's no way. And I'm doing the same thing side to side. And I'm like, okay, how can you keep it in focus if you're moving your head? And she says, no, you can. You can. We're going to get you there as well. But I'm telling you guys, when I said like it wasn't in focus, it was like my eyes weren't able to track that at all. At all. Like I'd go this way, and I'm like, how do you want me to keep it? It's like, oh, your eyes can actually move that way. I got that down. I got that down to where I could do that for the threshold they wanted me to get to, like 2 minutes straight. I could do that 2 minutes straight at the end, right? But then we do this thing where I do that same exercise, but now I'm walking down a hallway. Forget about that. That one, when I showed up there, you might as well put me on a boat in the middle of like raging rapids. There was no way that was happening. No way. And it's way better right now, but that's still, by the way, that is something that is still not perfect.
Yeah, we did a podcast about that, how after a concussion, your eyes, your head, and your body all want to stay stacked. They want to be looking at the same thing, experiencing the same thing. But the reality is, if you want to be able to talk to somebody while you're walking down a sidewalk and turn and look at them, if you want to be able to keep your car going straight when your head moves to check over your shoulder, those things have to be able to operate in the ways that you're explaining. So that's ironic that you brought that up, because that's something that we've addressed recently, because it was very challenging for Travis to initially do that, have his eyes look at a target and move his head. Every time he moved his head, his eyes wanted to go where his
Travis,
head went.
What I will tell you, Travis, from my experience is they wanted, the therapist that I was working, I worked with 4 different ones, but they wanted to push me to the point where it was like almost intolerable. I mean, it was always uncomfortable, but they almost, and I'd come back and we would, and then there's a big downtime. They could tell me I could practice that 2 times at home, and then that was it. And I would go back the next day and we would do it. And the takeaway is that the time that it took to get real intolerable for me got longer and longer and longer. Like I was able to hang in there longer until finally you just go, okay, I'm going to get sick, that type of thing. I found for me, the biggest thing was being dedicated to my rehab, which I didn't really have a choice. What I mean by that is I went in there for day one and they scheduled my rehab for the next 7 weeks. So I was getting there one way or the other. I was going. But I also was dedicated for doing my homework. And I don't know, I feel like that has paid off, I think.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'm a big research guy myself. I like to go and find out everything that's happening, and I'm pretty sure, and I'll let Abby correct me if I'm wrong, but that system that you were just talking about with your eyes and your head aligned, and that's your
vestibular. She's a vestibular therapist.
Yeah.
Yes, that's what I was working with. Yep.
Yeah, they shake you up and then say and it's honestly, it's not pleasant therapy to endure. I mean, that's
Yeah.
the honest truth about it. Like it's uncomfortable to be challenging your vestibular system. What really made you buy into that process?
You know what happened? I think the honest to God truth is I had no other option.
Yeah.
That's what was laid out there for me by a doctor I had grown to trust immensely.
So you trusted your doctor
Yep,
first.
absolutely I did.
And then that allowed you to trust his
Well, heck,
recommendations.
yeah, I mean, the first doctors sent me home with Tylenol. And
Well,
and
that's
then
kind of leads me
yeah,
to
and then this guy he was so up in arms over the whole thing. And he's like, look, I can't. And then he was so proactive, so proactive. He said, look, you can't work full days. And then the MRI comes back. He said, look, you can't work. Your brain only heals while it's in rest mode, only heals then. And then he also told me, he's like, look, the biggest things you can do, I want total rest. I want relaxation. I want you to eliminate stress. And I'm the father of 3 kids. I said, really? You have any children? I mean, I'll tell you.
just eliminate it. Just
if
get
I
rid of
could
the
find
stress.
out a way to just eliminate stress, believe me, the concussion would take care of itself because I'd be loaded. I'd be so wealthy. Everyone wants to get rid of stress,
exactly.
but that's
especially when things that like didn't stress you out so
now,
much before are now like more
because you
stressful.
can't regulate your emotions. Exactly.
Exactly.
And Lonnie, you're full of charisma.
Yeah.
You're such a relatable speaker and so passionate about your job. It makes sense why you're so good at it. But how much trust did it take when this doctor is telling you you're going to need to step away from that? That's losing a big part of who you are.
That's a big stressor for me. All right. Because let's be real. All right. It is, I've been at CBS for a long, long time, but there's always somebody waiting in the wings and people that I'm friendly with, but waiting in the wings to do my job. And who's to say that they can't, but they've got to give some people a chance. Maybe they can do it better. I don't know. But that's where your brain goes to. You start thinking about those things.
Yeah.
Then all of a sudden you've elevated your heart rate. Now you got more blood rushing to your brain and now you got a headache, right? It's just, it's sort of an evil circle there.
Yeah, man, for sure. You get into your sympathetic nervous system a lot easier, and it increases your blood pressure and your heart rate. And then all of a sudden, you start getting more nervous because your heart rate's up, and
every time
get anxiety.
Every time my heart rate would go up, you're right, the anxiety goes up, but my heart rate would go up, my headaches would crest.
Pound.
And that's the other thing. Time out. I want to address this. This to me is really important. I get a great release as well as an endorphin rush when I work out. All right. It's a great thing for me. And that had to be taken off the table entirely. Right. Initially. Now what Dr. McAllister is telling me is like, look, your assessments are fine. We're where you want to be. We're not finished, but we're where we want to be. You're back to work. And I get feedback for how I'm doing on TV. So I feel these people are telling me the truth. I think back to the gym, I did try it, and it just was too overwhelming and just hurt too much. And man, there's lots of loud noises. It's a real cacophony of stuff going on in there, and that did not fit well. It just didn't feel good at all. But I know that that's okay. Me now, I've got my doctor. I have Dr. Google that I spend a lot of time with. I know that that's a piece of this puzzle. I know that that's something I've got to do. I've got to get back there. But it can't be the torture that it kind of is right now. But I got to get back there.
Yeah. As soon as you are, or as far timeline away from concussion as you are, I couldn't have imagined me going back to the gym. But now I go to I'm in the gym 5 days a week. Like I wake up early every morning, and it makes me feel so much better about everything. It's working out and just blood moving, but it did take a while.
Yeah.
But
I like to think I'm going back next week. I like to think, Travis, I go back next week, because next week, spoiler alert, Next week, I'm scheduled to go back to a full-time workload. 3
That's
p.m. to midnight.
exciting.
You bet you it is.
That's
You bet you it is.
tremendous.
Because
Yeah.
you know what?
Awesome.
Let me not sort of cloud the issue here. I was well aware going into this that he said 4 to 8 weeks, away from work. But I was also aware that it could be a lot longer before I got back in. That was his assessment, okay, day one, right? Or day one of seeing the MRI. He said, look, we need 4 to 8 weeks. Well, 4 weeks came and went. 5 weeks came, it ended up being about 7. And that's me hitting the thresholds to go back to work. That's not me being perfect, all right? And I demand of myself to be perfect, you know what I mean? Which is just another stress I put on myself.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Perfectionism. I got you there.
Now, you trusted this doctor's recommendations. And like I said, that took a lot because you had to leave out the probably biggest part of your day, biggest part of your life, something that you're so good at and passionate about.
That's who I am, Ab. It's who I am.
Yeah. A big part of your identity. Now, not only did you choose to take those recommendations, but instead of just kind of sliding out without an explanation, you chose to tell people about this. And I thought that was a tremendously brave thing to do. What led you to coming to decide I'm gonna tell people what's going on and where I'm going, what's happening?
Because of my story, the way that it played out, and it just became very apparent to me. Again, I went back to work for 6 weeks, with no treatment whatsoever. And then once I see how this manifests itself in me, in my life, and not being able to drive, all this kind of stuff, it's like, no. This is my platform. This has got to be my platform because this is something that I'm living. And yeah, I don't know if this helps anybody. I hope it helps some people because I know, and I sort of gave you those examples, and I can give you 1,000. We bang our heads all the time. I watched my mother bang her head, even my mom, who's 85 years old, right? And I watched her bang her head. I don't know what this was maybe like, it's before the accident, maybe like 6 months ago, but it was a good bang. She basically was pulling something out of the cupboard. She was pulling a box of cereal out of the cupboard. Well, my kids had put the cereal in upside down. So when she pulled it out, it spilled the cereal down. So she then bent down to sort of try to scoop up some of the cereal to throw away. And as she stood up, well, that cupboard door was open, it hit her right smack on the top of the head. And she let out a screech, and we're just programmed. And again, I didn't know anything about concussions. This was like, I don't know how many months ago this was. But you get bags of ice, right? You put ice in a plastic bag, you put it on her head, and you rub a little dirt on it.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And
those were your beliefs. And those had to be your beliefs because that was your only exposure.
Yeah. Right.
No one talked about it in this way. Well, and I can't tell you how much I
just think it's like, if she had come up and banged her head, this will be a perfect example, and you can dovetail off of this. If she had stood up, banged her head on the bottom of that cupboard door, and blood was gushing down the side of her face, we're going to the hospital. Right?
Mm-hmm.
There was no blood.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no harm.
Yeah.
Right.
There's no blood, no harm.
Right. And even if you had gone to the hospital, they're just going to make sure there's no blood on the inside.
So it's an invisible injury.
I guess that's the takeaway. Yeah. And I guess, now I've got 2 little ones at home. My son is older, but my little ones, I'm now like, I don't know. I'm like uber paranoid about concussions, uber paranoid about it, that, they'll bang their head. So we go to see their primary care doctor. And he's like, yeah, no, we're good here, Lon. Little kids are going to fall down. No, but it was right. It was right that she fell right on the side of her head. He said, yeah, no, they'll do that. She's okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like they need to see Dr. McAllister if there is any.
Oh, there you go.
Sounds like a phenomenal doctor.
Well, but then, okay, wait, here's a good question for you guys. Because I am really concerned about that and paranoid as well. But you go to see like doctors, be it urgent care, be it what, even the emergency room, whatever. I mean, I'm a perfect example. I go to the emergency room, they're loaded with people on New Year's Eve, loaded with people in there, right? And it's, like I said, I refer to it as triage. Let's put a tourniquet on it. If it's bleeding, let's just, get them out of here and on to the next thing if that's the case. From my understanding, what I've learned in my personal history here is that the CAT scan told them about bleeding in the brain. Is that correct, Abby? Okay.
Yes.
And then the MRI, which is not always improved by your insurance, told Dr. McAllister about the damage that was done that wasn't blood related. Yes, no, am I right with this? Okay.
Correct.
Well,
You're correct.
so if I bring my daughter in and the doctor gives her the good once over and he does the thing with the lights in her eyes, right? And you're watching the pupils and stuff like that. And if all of that registers as okay, he gives me the okay and off we go. I feel okay because I got an okay on her. But then I think to myself, I mean, I don't know. I guess when I'm thinking about being in the emergency room, and again, don't hold a lot of this. You can't take this for gospel because I don't remember a lot of it. But maybe they did the eyeball thing. I don't know if they did. The lights in your eye. I don't know if they did.
But either way, you're right. And emergency rooms are triage. Are you in immediate danger? So that's their first job to rule out. But after that, then you go see the primary care and you mention some other things, seeing if pupil dilation is even, doing the once over that you're looking at. But now you are someone who is well versed in concussions. Okay. So say your kid has a sports injury, you take them to the emergency room. All right, no bleeding in the head. Take them to the primary care doctor. Their pupils react to light. They still have good reflexes. They should be fine. But now you're the champion of understanding my kid is now not doing well in school, having headaches, starting to change their behavior towards me and their friends. You're now this magnet for being able to pull out these symptoms that otherwise truly go under the radar and can change the course of a kid's life if they don't have the opportunity to get the concussion treated.
Well, I again, as of right now, we've had one incident where, okay, I want to get her over to see Dr. Forrest, and we go in, and Dr. Forrest, no, she's good. They do the pupil thing. And the good news is I haven't seen any of the subsequent signs that you're talking about.
Great.
And honestly, it wasn't that big of a fall now that I look at it in hindsight, but it was she knocked her head. I saw her knock her head. It was enough of a knock that I watched it sort of like her head bounce a bit, you know what I mean? And
yes.
Better to be safe than sorry.
Yeah, that's absolutely worth checking out if you see the head bounce. And you might even be able to relate to this part too. So after your concussion, you went back to work and you had people ask you things like, have you had a few drinks? You're kind of bouncing off the walls, doing your best to get by. So one of the big platforms that kind of also allows us to speak about this in a productive way is, so I work with professional athletes or college-based athletes after a concussion because their risk of sustaining a lower body injury is significantly higher after they're cleared to return to play. So that means the most recent study we referenced was in the NBA. So after a player sustains a concussion, they get cleared to go back to their sport. Within the first 90 days, they're 11 times more likely to sustain a lower body injury. And all the things that you've explained of how you just felt off, could not get balance right, could not function in that way, I'm sure it resonates with you in a different way why that injury risk is so much higher. Even after medical professionals say his pupils look good, get him back in there.
Without a doubt, I can totally see that. I feel immensely more stable on my feet right now, but I don't feel like I did pre-concussion. And you brought up, Abby, you brought up a phrase that I think is almost the calling card of this. And I used it, and it was pointed out like it's an accurate. You said you're just feeling off. You're not feeling right. I said to Dr. McAllister, like my first day, he's doing all of his tests, but tell me how you feel. I said, I don't know. I don't know how I feel. I can take a deep breath in. I'm getting the oxygen out of the air. I can exhale. I just don't feel right. I don't feel right. I don't, and you
Mhm.
can't necessarily put your finger on it. You know what I mean? But you got to listen to your body, man. If your body's telling you don't feel right, something's there.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Man, and I tell you, you were saying, it is like all my words coming out of your mouth.
Yeah.
I've said that exact same thing. Like that is almost my verbatim to what I have said. And I'm just so glad now that we have a voice to get out there, because I know there are so many more people out there that are going through the same thing that need to hear this.
In case he isn't able to reconnect, and I imagine time-wise he might be having to move along. I just want to reiterate, and hopefully he can hear this part, that even though it was incredibly brave, I don't think it's been acknowledged the full realm of what he decided to do. So he trusted this doctor. He knew it was time to step away to be able to get all of this addressed. But at that time, he didn't know what to expect. He didn't know what the recovery would entail. He didn't know what it would mean for his career. And he still chose to speak about it in a public way with all of that uncertainty and all of that at stake. And it meant a lot to a lot of people to hear him talk about it in that way. So I hope he knows how much everyone really appreciates his willingness to be that open and vulnerable at that period of time when there was so much on the line for him.
Hey, it's Travis again to close things out. First off, I want to thank you all for listening to this episode. If you're still with us, I hope you felt the same thing I did during that conversation with Lonnie. A real sense of honesty, connection, and courage. Now, if you notice the conversation cut off a little suddenly, I guess Lonnie's cell phone batteries just aren't as strong as he is. He reached out to ask us to make sure everyone knows he's doing better, he's on the road to recovery, and he's learning more about himself every day. I also want to say this. Lonnie didn't have to do this. He didn't owe anyone an explanation or a public story. But he chose to speak up, and in doing so, gave a voice to a whole lot of people who are still silently going through this. That takes guts. So, from the bottom of my heart, thank you, Lonnie. And to anyone out there listening who feels unseen, unheard, or misunderstood, you are not alone. If this episode meant something to you, please follow us on Spotify, leave a review, share this with someone who might need to hear it. You can find us on Instagram at concussion_podcast, and all episodes are up on YouTube as well. Just search Concussion. We've got a new episode out every week, and we're just getting started. Until next time, take care of your brain and take care of each other.